So we're gonna do some more exploration into the thought and feeling cycle today, and understand why fear really can take over our thoughts. And and I wanted to give you some more in-depth understanding on some of the brain areas that I've been talking about in other videos. I wanted to make sure that you have kind of a visual and a better understanding of what, where those areas are, and what some of their functions are. All right, so grab your cup of coffee or tea and sit down and let's go through some of this stuff. So this is my book, The Human Brain. I'm going to show you a few things in here. We're going to start with some of the structures in the brain that I've been discussing in other videos. And the first one, we're going to go from the outside of the brain in. The other thing I want to show you is my cute little brain model. Isn't he cute? Yeah. So this part, it gets put together, but if I snap him together too hard, I can't get him apart, so I can't utilize it to show you things. So we're going to start today with the prefrontal cortex, and then we're going to work into the other structure called the amygdala. Those are the two areas that I've been talking about in the other videos. So your prefrontal cortex is this area right here. Okay, so it's this front area of the brain. It's right behind your forehead, right up in there, and you have, the two sides in the front, but that's your prefrontal cortex. So your prefrontal cortex is your most recently evolved part of your brain. It is used with your planning complex cognitive behavior. It is for personality expression, decision making, moderating social behavior. So say there was an impulse that somebody wanted to do something, but it was socially inappropriate. That part would be helping to moderate that as well. So the other big part, and the reason why we're talking about it today, is that it also is for emotional regulation, right? So when this area is highly evolved or highly, there's a lot of mass there, and there's also a lot of neuron connections in this area, we end up being able to control our emotions better. All right, so you see this guy? So prefrontal cortex right there, just like I said, right behind the forehead. Our next area is the amygdala. Now I've got to pull this little guy apart. So here I've taken off one half of the brain, all right? And when you get inside, they don't have this part color-coded, but your amygdala, you have two, you have one on each side. It sits right in front of this little brown structure right here. Sits deep in the brain. That's part of your limbic brain, your limbic system. It's one of the most ancient parts of the brain. So a couple of years ago, I went to a neurology exhibition. It was really cool. I actually got to hold, I have pictures of it, I got to hold a human brain in my hands. It might freak some people out. I thought it was super cool. I was really geeking out, you guys. So, and it was amazing, I literally held it in my hands. I had gloves on. It had been in formaldehyde, but a real human brain, somebody's brain that had been inside their skull. I was holding it in my hands. It was awesome. Like I said, I kind of geek out about this. There right there is the amygdala. Like I said, you have one on each side. So I want you to understand that it's deep in the brain, and it's part of our ancient survival parts of our brain. It's part of our emotional reaction. It is a reflexive reaction, you guys. Literally, this processes before we ever have any cognitive understanding of what we're responding to. 100 milliseconds. So it's super fast. It reacts before we even have a conscious understanding of what we're reacting to. It is the fear processing center. Like I said, survival part of your brain. The other thing that is important in it is that it forms memories from fear. So they're instant, they are intense fear memories. So when we have something that has scared us intensely, this part right here, it's trying to keep us from going into that situation again or experiencing that again, because if it does, it can keep us safe. It can keep us from putting ourselves in danger. It plays a role in anxiety. Makes sense though, right? It's all our fear. When we have anxiety, they talk about it being, we have an overactive amygdala. The other thing that the amygdala can do is it can have, when it takes over our emotional processing, when it is in control, that's known as an amygdala hijack. So it's taking control of the emotional formation at the time, the emotional responses. It's really easy to try to boil all this stuff down into such simplistic language and to make it seem like, oh, the amygdala is our fear center. And that's a really great way to be able to remember it. But the reality is, you guys, is that our brains are uber complex, like crazy complex, right? We know so much more than we've ever known about the brain and neurology, and we know so much now, but we have literally only scratched the surface of what the brain does and how it does it. We're just barely starting to understand that. In the next 20 years, we'll have advances in technology. We're going to be able to understand more, and I think at that point we're still not going to fully understand how the brain works and its capabilities, etc. So we do know quite a bit about it now, but nowhere near what is actually there. So the one thing I wanted to say with that is that we tend to boil things down into things that we can understand. So, we say, oh, the amygdala is the fear center, the prefrontal cortex is your executive function and your emotional regulation, but it's so much more complex than that. One of the things that they've talked about recently with the amygdala is that it helps us to evaluate things in our environment and then determine their importance. And I like that a little bit more than just the fear center, because the amygdala, when we just say fear, that kind of has a negative connotation, but what it's really doing is evaluating our environment through our senses. All right, so here's my cute little brain diagram. Oh, yeah. So this area, prefrontal cortex, right? And then you've got your amygdala down in that section. All right, so the amygdala sends signals to the prefrontal cortex less than, that's 100 milliseconds. So super fast, right? And then this area has a chance to check out the information, and then it sends it back, right? And it does so through several other areas of the brain. I won't make it too complex, you guys. But, so the emotional regulation comes back to the amygdala, right? When we're stuck in fear, what we focus on grows, and that is literally in our brain. When we're focusing on fear, we are building more neuronal pathways and more connections in this amygdala. We're saying we are in a fearful situation, we're stuck in that fear state, so build more connections there, right? Put more connections there, make it bigger. We need to be able to grab that input faster from the environment and react and have that reflexive response. Like, when we see a snake, we jump back before we even say, oh, well, it's just a garter snake, right? It's not going to hurt me. No, we have that immediate response because of this center, all right? So when we start to take, we take the information, the message that this is giving us, so the message is coming up to this prefrontal cortex, and this is our executive function and our emotional regulation. When we actually listen to that message and we take an action, then the message back here says, all right, we've got control of this situation. We don't have to stay in fear all the time about it. We can kind of put water on the fire versus more fuel. All right? When we don't listen to this, when we don't listen to the message coming up here to the prefrontal cortex, we're literally putting more fuel on the amygdala. We're saying more fear, more fear, more fear. We need to react faster. When we start to bring in that conscious awareness of the fear, we start building this area more. We start building that prefrontal cortex. We literally build connections. We have the neuroplasticity of the brain. We build those neural connections in the prefrontal cortex. And as this prefrontal cortex gets bigger through practice, remember I was talking about going to the gym, and every time you pull yourself out of that fear response and you bring some conscious awareness on it, every single time, it's like doing that rep at the gym. I should have brought my weights over. So it's like doing that rep at the gym, right? It's building that muscle, that mental muscle, but you're literally building connections in this prefrontal cortex, right? As you build more connections in this prefrontal cortex, it makes it easier to override that fear. You guys get that? That's so important. Okay, so initially, that fear response is going to be so much more powerful, but every time we pull ourselves out of that fear and we build this prefrontal cortex by bringing an awareness to it and taking action, then we're building this larger than this. So your prefrontal cortex, as it gets more power, as it gets more neuronal connections, it's going to be able to put this fire out. You guys get that? That's so important. So you can think of the prefrontal cortex as thought. Now technically, thought is all over the brain, but I just want to give you guys a kind of an understanding of this. We're boiling this down so basic, right, you guys? Because that's how we understand things. We understand things through concepts. So thought, prefrontal cortex, feeling, amygdala, right? So you can have a thought-feeling cycle. Now, initially, that feeling is going to feed up to the thought, right? So if you have a fearful feeling, you're going to have a fearful thought, all right? Now, the thought that goes back down to the feeling is either that water or it's that gasoline or it's that fuel, all right? So the thought that goes back down to the feeling is super important. If you want to calm down, then the thought going down has to be a calming thought. If you think another incendiary thought, it's only going to make this worse. It's only going to intensify that feeling. Let's say I'm out hiking, right? I love to hike, and walking through the woods, and I hear a branch snap, right? And it does, it happens. I heard one the other day. So initially, that feeling is fear. It's like, and it's going to tell me the worst case scenario. It's going to give me the worst case scenario so that it has my attention, and it's going to try to save my life. So initially it's going to say bear, mountain lion, coyote, something like that. And it's going to send that feeling up to my prefrontal cortex, up to that thought center. And the thought that I think is then going to either put out this feeling or it's going to intensify it. So let's say I'm walking along, I hear that snap, and if I hear the snap, I'm going to look around and I'm going to try to figure out, is it a bear? And I do have bear around this area, you guys, so it could be. I have not seen one in this area. There was one hit down the road from me a few years ago, so they are here. But I've never seen one while I've been out in this area. Doesn't mean that I never will. It could be just a matter of time. But, so I'm going to look around me. I'm going to check out and see if there is something dangerous in my environment. And once I see, so that's bringing that cognition to the situation, right? Once I see that, then I can tell myself the feeling. I can say, all right, it's not a bear. I don't see a bear. Maybe a tree, a branch fell. Maybe, maybe it was a squirrel, or maybe it was, a raccoon or something. So I look around, I feed my amygdala information saying, it's okay. We're all right. So then that feeling has a chance to diminish. Okay? But now let's say, all right, let's say that I'm more of a fearful person. I don't see anything. So then I go into all the things it could be. Oh my God, it could be a bear. It could be the mountain lion. You know, mountain lions, they don't let themselves be seen. Oh my God, right? You guys see that? I could imagine millions of things it could have been, and I would pour gasoline on that feeling. And then it goes up here, it's gonna create worse thoughts. The worst thoughts are gonna create worse feelings. Pretty soon I'm gonna be on a freaking panic attack on that trail. And I'm either gonna be running, screaming out of that woods over a branch snapping, right? Or having an all-out panic attack and maybe fainting or something. So, yeah, that's the thought feeling cycle, you guys. And you know, this is particular on fear, but you know, we are a imaginative species. We can imagine things that are not in our physical environment at the time, and we can literally create those feelings from thought alone. It's a pretty cool cycle. Once you understand that you have control over it, and the more control you take, the more control you'll have, because it's like that muscle, you know? It is like that muscle. When we exercise it and when we put our conscious awareness into it, we build it. And we build that control over our emotions. Now, do I want to control them to the point where I'm like, I don't want to listen to you? No, because if I'm out on that trail and I hear that branch snap, I want my fear to say, hey, you should pay attention to that. I want it to give me that information. I just don't want it to, you know, take control of the situation and run me off down some, you know, dark, awful fear rabbit hole. So, you guys remember that thought feeling cycle that I just shared, right? Thought feeling cycle. Remember when we were talking about the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system? So that sympathetic system is kicking out that adrenaline and that cortisol and the noradrenaline. It's igniting our bodies, and it is trying to get us to take action. You know, say like I'm driving down the road and I'm going over the speed limit, and I crest a hill and I get over the other side, and there's a police officer coming straight, you know, right on the other side. You know, I don't even have time to think, oh my God, I'm speeding. It's immediate. We've got that adrenaline hit, and our heart's pumping, and we're like, right? And then all of a sudden we look at our speedometer and we're like, was I speeding? Was he gonna turn around and follow me and give me a ticket? Right? All right. It's immediate, you guys. That feeling, those chemicals get poured into our system immediately, and then we have to deal with them. And it depends on what our thought is after that as to whether we're feeding that more or if we're calming it down. But once those chemicals, that cortisol and that adrenaline, once that gets out into your system, you have to let it through. It has to process. Now, my horses, when they come down off from adrenaline, they shake their heads and they blow out, and they, and they're literally like letting that adrenaline wash through them. So understand that when we do have that thought feeling cycle going on, and then we have that rush of adrenaline and cortisol out into our system, we gotta let it process. And if we don't let it process, it stays in our system, and then we end up having issues with it later. You know, it's a residual and it builds. And having all that cortisol in our system, talked about this a few days ago, having all that cortisol in our system, it decreases our immunity. We don't need that right now. We need our immunity up. So deal with this cortisol, right? It's taking blood out of our intestines and our stomach so that it can be pumped out into the muscles so that we can act, right? So if we're high on that cortisol, we're not digesting things, right? So, you know, our brain gets hijacked. We can get hijacked by that amygdala. So we literally have to take conscious control. So that's my message for today, you guys. Take that conscious control of the fear. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for supporting this. And yeah, hope you guys have a great day.